And this is the agenda. We will first look into the three functions that we will talk about today, which is ExFlow purchase codes, ExFlow reference codes, and ExFlow contracts. And then we will do the walkthrough in Business Central. And we will look at how you can set these functions up, and then a few examples of how it can look like. And then we will end with a Q&A if you have any questions. So here are the three functions that we will go through today. We will look in Business Central at the setup, as I said. We will look at some common scenarios of how you can use them and how they appear in the import journal and approval status. So first we have ExFlow purchase codes, which will help you save time, and it also reduces the risk of errors, for example. And then we have ExFlow reference codes, and that helps you save time, and they can also trigger approval workflows and purchase codes and more. And then ExFlow contracts that help you maintain control over recurring documents, so you can set configurations on these contracts that gives you warnings if something would, for example, deviate, or if something would not be as you set it up. So let's go into depth a little bit more of what they do. So ExFlow purchase codes, you can automate the task related to setting accounts online using purchase codes, which means that you don't have to repeatedly do the same work over and over again. And the purchase code can be linked to a vendor. It can be linked to a reference, to a contract, or an ExFlow setup. For example, you can create a purchase code assigned to a vendor from whom you often receive like recurring invoices with the same lines, the same accounts, and so on. And when you import an invoice, you can set up like a trigger so that this then gets you these lines, the posting on entire lines that you have chosen in the code. And in the codes, you can split lines, you can allocate by percentage, amounts, dimensions can be added, VAT groups, you can add deferral periods, and so on. So you can save a lot of time by doing this and avoid the manual work then. You can also quickly create a purchase code in the import journal with the save coding to vendor as well, if you want to link this to a vendor. And then we have ExFlow reference codes. So you can use these to apply logic to invoices that you import with a reference, which then is used to trigger a specific action when you import a document with the reference. And a reference can be anything interpreted as someone's name. It can be a phone number. It can be a variation in spelling, or it can be any value on the invoice. And with the reference, you can trigger approvers, you can trigger vendors, dimensions, you can trigger accounts on lines, coding on lines, and you can link it to an ExFlow contract and more. And then we have ExFlow contracts. So with ExFlow contracts, you have full control over recurring documents such as rent, cell phone subscriptions, rental products, and you can set up contracts according to, for example, an external contract. And then if it would deviate from the terms that you set up, you will receive a warning when you import the document in the import journal. And I will show you this so it's more clear later. Or you can just use this if you have recurring invoices that you get over and over again, for example. You can also automate the workflow for these documents. So if everything matches, a setting can allow these invoices to go through the entire flow and be auto-approved without needing to be sent out for approval. And you can also set a setting in ExFlow Setup that if everything is okay, then it can be posted directly as well. And you can also set up self-billing with ExFlow contracts. I will not talk about that today, but we have information in our online manual, so I will send you the link. And you can also set up ExFlow Omni approval to have your configurations and what you set up double approved by another user in Business Central before you start using it as well. And I will send you a link to that as well, because we won't go into depth with the ExFlow Omni approval today. So let's start the walkthrough in Business Central. Okay, so here we have Business Central, the start page. We will go through the functions in more detail now, and there are several features and functions that can assist you in your daily work, but as I said, we will only focus on these 3 today, which then can automate and streamline your daily tasks. And these functions also help you maintain control of your processes in ExFlow. You can use all of these features or just some, and we recommend that you start small to get going, and then gradually you increase your usage. So for example, start with one vendor, review it, see if there's a reference that you can interpret, which then could trigger a purchase code and then automatically create entire entries in the import journal. So set a vendor up and then look at one more vendor and then gradually increase the usage. So let's start by reviewing ExFlow purchase codes. And a typical example of using purchase codes is assigning a vendor a purchase code. And this allows you, every time you import a document from that vendor, to automatically add coding on lines. So when you set up a purchase code, you specify the amounts for each line, and you can choose if you want to split a portion of the amount per line. You can set fixed amounts also per line if you know that. For example, there's always a fixed fee of shipping, for example. You can also choose not to split an amount at all. So there are many options that you can set on the lines as well. So how do you create a purchase code then? Well, you can either create the codes directly in the import journal using the save coding to vendor function if you want to add it to a vendor, or you can go to ExFlow purchase codes directly there. And once you created a code, you can assign it to a reference or an ExFlow contract or in ExFlow setup as well. And this means then that you don't have to link the purchase code directly to a vendor specifically. So you can use it in many ways. So let's go to ExFlow purchase code so take a look at how a code might look like. And I have bookmarked this page. You can search for it or add it as a bookmark as well. So here I have a few purchase codes. If you want to add a new one, you click on New up here, and then you fill out the information. But we will look at one code that we have already created today. So let's go to this one. So up here, when you fill out a code, you first fill out the code, which is the name. So something that clearly identifies what it means for you. And then you add a description if you want to that explains it. So for example, I have added rent for Sharp products here. You can also work with proposed VAT lines and document creation amount checks here as well if you want to. And then after this, you fill out the lines down here. So for example, you can specify an account, a fixed amount, and so on. You can do many things here. So I have, for example, here chosen 4 lines with 4 different accounts. And I have chosen in this column not to allocate any amount except for, this is percentage, but then except for a fixed amount, which is 100 krona in this case. I have also added deferral codes in this one. There's also a column here called approval. And if you click in this one, the line will be sent out for approval. If it's not clicked or ticked, then it will not be visible for the users on the web and therefore cannot be approved. So that's one way of setting up. Let's look at another example. Let's go to this one. So in this one, you can see that I have added percentages that I want the amounts on the invoices that I connect this to be 50% on this line, 50% on this, except for 100 krona fixed amounts on this. I have also added department codes here, dimensions on this one. So let's go to the import journal to look at the scenarios with this, how it looks like in the import journal. So on the first line here, you can see that I have a column called purchase codes. If you don't have it, as I mentioned in the last info session, you can personalize the page so that you can bring forward the columns that you don't have, and then you can move them in the order that you want them as well. So here we have then purchase codes. Let's look at the first one we looked at. So let's look at the details again, just a little reminder that I added that I wanted a fixed amount on one line, and then I added deferral code, but no other percentage of amounts allocated to the other lines. So if we look on the lines here, you can see that it created 4 different lines. It has one with fixed amount, and the other ones, there's no other amount. So then you have to fill that out. And then it added the deferral code. The second example, then I added that I wanted the amount to be split on 2 of the lines, and then a fixed amount. So then the total amount is already set and added to the whole line here. And then I also have the department code here added as well, which then generated the approval rules here. So as you can see, you can achieve different scenarios depending on how you fill in your purchase code. And if you want to make a code, a change to a code, you can either do so by going to the card or to search for ExFlow purchase codes and then go to the card there. Or you can use save coding to vendor, as I mentioned. And an advantage is that with save coding to vendor is that ExFlow takes what you have put on the line already and then save it directly to the vendor card. So it's convenient for those times when you want to just use the coding that you have already used and is created, and then you add it to a specific vendor. So to do so, you stand on the invoice that you want to do this for, and then you create actions, functions, and then save coding to vendor. If you already have a code to the vendor, then you click here and then you get a question if you want to replace it. So you can also replace codings that you have, but it's only one coding at a time. And to find the coding that you set to the vendor, you stand on the line of the vendor you want to see, and you can click on ExFlow vendor setup, and you can see for that vendor, and you can see ExFlow purchase code over here. Or you can search for ExFlow vendor setup. And then you get, for all of the vendors that we have something specific for here. And then if you go even further into the vendor, you get more settings that you can use to automate your workflows with your vendors. And I will go through these settings in the next info session in December. If you want to save the coding directly but not to the vendor, you can click on this and then new, and then you can add there as well. And as usual, more information can be found in our online manual on our documentation platform, and you can find some examples there as well, how you can set up codes and what everything means as well. That was a little bit about ExFlow purchase codes. Let's move over to ExFlow reference codes. So say that you have an invoice that an employee needs to approve, because on that invoice, there is that person's name as a reference. So you can then interpret a reference, for example, if you use ExFlow data capture or any other program that you use before you import the document in the import journal. And then here in the import journal, you can see that there's a column for the reference codes. And as I said earlier, you can bring them forward and move them in the order that you want if you personalize the page. And a reference can then trigger actions when you import it. So for example, you can set that there should be a certain ExFlow purchase code used if you interpret that reference. You can get then automatically created lines with accounts. You can, for example, set that if this reference is interpreted, the employee should be the first approver in an approval flow. or it's used for triggering approval rule and so on. So let's go into how you create a reference code and where to find it. You can either search for it or add it as a bookmark. I have it as a bookmark up here. So if you want to create a new one, you click on New. And then there's some information that you need to fill out. So let's go through what the fields mean here. So the first one, reference code up here. This is the value that you interpret in order for it to be linked to this reference code. So for example, this can be a name or a phone number or any value then that you can interpret. And then down here on the related reference values, you can add other values that then is linked to this one. And then you have description. So here you describe the reference so you understand what it is. And then you have vendor number. So if you select a vendor here and receive a document from that vendor with this reference value interpret, then this reference will be selected. But if you, for example, would receive an invoice from another vendor with this interpret value, then it will not be selected. And then you have contract number. If the reference is connected to a contract, you can see the number here, and then you can even click here and go directly to the contract for it. And then you have first approver. So if you choose an approver here, it will be the first in the flow using a setting in ExFlow Setup as well to activate it. And this can also be used to find an approval rule with this as a first approver. And then you have ExFlow purchase code. So do you know which lines you want to create when you interpret this reference? Then you add the code here. You also have purchaser code here. And then you also have approval rule. So instead of the first approver setting, you can choose the setting here if you know which approval rule that should be linked to this reference. And if you put an approval rule on here, it will be a fixed flow. So if you work with a dynamic flow, then you will lose it in this case. So it's advantage if you want to bypass the dynamic flow, because then it will always be the same approvers according to the rule in this way and so on. But that's good to keep in mind. And then you have blocked. So if you want to stop the whole reference, you click on this one. You can, if you add related values, you can also block the related values only here if there's some values that you don't want it to be using right now. And then related values down here to explain it a little bit more. Here you can enter any values that should be linked to this reference, so any interpret values. So for example, a different spelling or variation of phone number and so on. So for example, if you have a reference of it with a name that's spelled Carolina with a K, but you get a reference value on your invoice where they accidentally wrote Carolina with a C. Then you can write Carolina with a C down here if you wrote Carolina with a K up here, and they are both linked then to this reference. Yeah, that was a little bit about the setup. Here on the first page, you can see an overview of all the reference. You can edit the list here as well easily. You don't have to enter the card. On the right here, you can also add related values on the line you're on by clicking on Edit Lines. You can open a contract. So if you have a reference linked to the contract, you can open here. If you click on Reassign to another reference code here, the values will end up below the one you're standing on in a new one selected where you click on this one. So you can add the values from, example, this one I'm on now. If you want to move it to another, you can click here and choose the one it should move to. You can also show or hide your blocked references if you want to see those again. And that's it. You can also create reference directly in the import journal. And you can, when you create a new user as well, set a setting that when you create new users, it should create a reference automatically. And you have to activate this setting as well for it to work. So let's have a look in the import journal of how it looks like there. So here I have the column for the reference codes. Here we have a reference, Joachim, for example. If you click on the dots here, you get all the reference that you can choose from, but let's look at how this reference look like. So on this one, I have added that it should be this approver as a first approver. I have added a purchase code. I have added an approval rule, and I have some related references here as well. But I have interpreted Joachim, so then it's this one that's connected. So if we look here in the import journal, you can see that we have the purchase code and the approval rule. And the purchase code then creates these lines, because that's what we added in that one. And we have an approval rule here. So if we scroll down here, we can see the approvers for this is Joachim, Erik, and Filippa. If we go to the approval rule, you can see here that it's only Erik and Filippa on this one. You can see that Joachim is not included in this approval rule. And that is because we have added in the reference code that when this value or any related values are interpreted, then Joachim should be the first approver. Meaning that you could have scenarios that depending on what value you interpret, you could have different first approvers and then the rest is the same. So you can have a different first approver and then Erik and Filippa. So that was reference codes. Let's move on to ExFlow Contracts. And today I understand it's a lot of information and you can watch the recording afterwards. And in the YouTube link that you get, you also have some chapters. So if you want to move in the video, you can easily see the different chapters there as well. So ExFlow Contracts are great if you have reoccurring invoices that you either have like on contracts or just reoccurring documents that you have. And it can be, for example, telephone subscriptions, it can be coffee machines, it can be car rentals, premises fees, and so on. And with ExFlow Contract, you can set settings so that documents go through the entire flow in ExFlow and are auto-posted, and you do not need to send those out for approval. And if everything matches, then it can be posted if you set it up that way. And you can easily keep track of whether an invoice deviates from what you set up. So for example, if an amount is in excess of the set value on the contract, or if you receive more invoices than you should receive per period of the contract, or if the total amount have been reached and so forth before it expires. And if something should deviate from what you have set up, you can set up to receive a warning in the import journal before you then have to manually create the document. But if everything aligns, then it does not even have to be sent out to the approvers. Then you don't have to do anything in the import journal if you activate one setting that we have as well with the contracts. So let's start by looking at how you set up a contract. I have it as a bookmark up here. So I have 3 different contracts here. If you want to create a new one, you click on new here, but let's go to the one that I already created. So if you want to create one, you fill out all the information, and then the last step is this first button up here. So create contract reference. But the things that you fill out then are many things here, but let's go back to the first page as before. Let me show you these things before we move to that actually as well. So here we have something I mentioned, Omni approval. So if you have created an Omni approval rule, if you use Omni approval, then you can click here to see who have approved the setup for this, for example. And this column, the status column, is connected to Omni approval as well. So if you have not activated Omni and set up any approval rules for ExFlow contract, you will not see these things. You can see attachments here and add attachments, but then you can also use this copy contract. And copy contracts is you can use it for if you have several contracts that look the same but with some different owners or some different details. You can copy a created one instead of just sitting and create new ones and have to fill out everything. Then you can easily copy and use the same information and just change the information you need to change. You can work here with dimensions. You can look at the setup here that's connected to self-billing, for example. But then you have this one that I want to show you before we enter a contract, which is show missing contract invoices. With ExFlow contract, you can create a contract with invoice periods, and you can create it without invoice periods. And I will show you this in a little bit. But if you create it with invoice periods, you can follow missing contract invoices here. So you can see for all the contracts in this view, you see what contract it is, and you can see what invoices that are missing. If you click on the contract here, you go directly to the contract, for example, and then you can see more information. But then let's go to the contract and continue where I stopped. So as I said, you can set up a contract in two ways. You can set it up with or without invoice periods. And you can see here, it says invoice periods, and this is where you activate it. Without invoice periods, you receive the invoices in order, and you see the total amounts for the contract, and you set the tolerances for the entire contract and more. With invoice periods, you can receive several invoices at the same time because all invoice periods are open, and you can keep track of whether you have received an invoice per period either through what I showed you or here on this page. And you can also set tolerances per period and more. And today I will show you a contract that is set up with invoice periods. So at the top here, you see the same buttons as the first page. You also see here the show missing contract invoices if you want to see the details just for this contract. To the right here, you have the fact box. You can, under attachments here, see if you have added any attachments, and you can add notes here as well. You also have under details here the statistics of the contract. And you can click on the numbers here to get some more details. So you can here see which amount has been matched in the import journal, which is this one. And you can see created documents, but not posted in non-posted, which these are the ones that are out in approval status right now. And then posted amounts. So if you want to see more information, you click here. And then you will see the documents. So these are the statistics for the posted ones, and you can see the documents. And then you can go even further. So if you want more details, you click on the numbers here to see even more details. And then let's look at how you fill out a contract. So the first one, contract number here, you cannot fill that out, but this is just a sign. So the first one you create will have a number 1 and then a number 2 and so on. And then you have vendor number. So you select the vendor here and then the name will pop up under here. And then you have something called external contract number. And this setting is important. For you to be able to connect this contract with the vendor, you need to interpret a value when you import documents. So a reference, that means. So in order for the automated connection with the documents, these settings have to work together. And the most common may be that you have an external contract and then you receive an invoice, and then the reference could be, for example, the contract number, or if you see the contract number on there. So then you can interpret the contract number then, for example. You can also add the contracts manually in the import journal, but we want you to automate this. So that means interpret the value so then it's connected, and that way automatically. If the vendor would change the number, then you can also change this later. So therefore, when you activate a contract, you also create a reference code. And as I said, this is important. You interpret that value so you can do the connection. Then you have a description. It's for you. Add whatever information that you want there. Then you have inactivated. So this turns on automatically when you have met all criteria below and you're done with the contracts. So for example, if the date passes of the contracts. You can also manually deactivate the contract here if you want to. You have copy attachment to matching invoices here. So if you want an attachment you have added to this contract to accompany each invoice that you post or send out, it will be as a supporting document on those invoices. So if you click on this box or this little setting here, then this will accompany the document, and then you can upload a document here. And then you have reference created, and this is the reference that then creates the ExFlow reference. So if you click on this, you can see the information as the reference card. You also have the option here to add a purchase code. First approver, approval rule, purchaser code, and so on. In this case, I have added a purchase code because I want these codes to create the lines, the coding on lines. And then I added an approval rule. Because if for some reason the contract deviates from what I have set up, then I need to send it out to approvers. So then I know that these approvers and these approval rule should approve the invoice. Then I already have this, so it will be added. And then you have reference description. This description will follow the reference code that you create added to that. And then here you have settings connected to self-billing. And this is a feature for you if you, for example, have reoccurring payments to a specific vendor without receiving invoices. So with this, you can activate the invoice periods below, and then you can keep track of what you invoice. And you can read more about this on our documentation platform in the manual, and I will send you the link as well. Let's move on to the general terms that you have to set up. So here you add the dates that it should be valid. You can add a currency code here. If it's left blank, it will automatically become what your system is set up for. And then you add the total contract amount. And you can also extend the contract here by entering a new date as well. And then under here, you add some more settings. So for example, in the first one here, you say how long each period is. So in this case, I have added 1 month because 1M is 1 month. You could add 3 months or whatever you want it to be. And then you set a date. When should this start? If you have not set up invoice periods, then this is where you keep track of what period you are in right now with this contract, and it changes after you post a document. So you can see here which is the most recent period that you have active for this contract. You also choose match date here, and it can be due date, posting date, or document date. You also add how many invoices that should be received per period. I have added 1 here. And then you have something called check periods. Now I have set this up with invoicing periods, meaning I won't see this green. If it would have been without invoicing periods, then this would be green. And what it means is that if something would deviate from what you have set up, you will receive a warning message in the import journal telling you that, for example, an invoice has already been posted for this period, or you have received more invoices than you should have during that period, and or the amount is higher, for example. And then you have to create the document and send it out for approval since it deviates from the setup of the contract. If you activate invoice periods, then this is then not ticked automatically, since the meaning with periods is that you can receive invoices randomly. So we will continue looking at amounts. So if a document have an amount with a bigger amount than what you set here, for example, then it will let you know in the import journal as well, but it won't look at the numbers and give you a warning message on these, for example. And then you also set here then the max amount per invoice. You can also set tolerance percentage and tolerance amount here if you have not set up invoice periods. If you set up invoice periods, you set this per period down here. We will look at it in a little bit. And you can also use payment term code here. And that is if it has a different payment term than on the vendor card. You can set that here. Otherwise, then just leave it empty. So, invoice periods. Here you can see the periods. If you want to activate it, you click on lines and create periods, and then we will calculate these for you. So the system will set it up for you, depending on what you have set under the general terms and settings up here. So with this, you might receive several invoices in 1 month, and then you want to match them. You can receive one invoice in 1 month, and you add it, will match it in another month, and so on. So that's why you use these instead of in a row per month, and so on. So you fill in the information above, and then you create the invoice periods lines, and then down here you can follow per period what you match, the non-posted and the posted amounts. So you can see it here. And then if you click on these amounts, you get some more details as well. And then you can click even further, go even further to get even more details on the numbers there. You can set the tolerances per month or per period here. You can change the amount per period if you know that you will receive a higher amount 1 month, for example. You also have here mail reminder sent and then reminder sent. So if you activate invoice reminder, then you can follow that if a reminder is sent in any of the periods here, if an invoice, for example, is missing. So invoice reminder, you activate it here. And it only works if you have activated invoice periods. So if you have not, then you cannot use it. And you use this to keep track of if an invoice is missing. So you fill out who should receive the reminder, or if it's several. You can also set up, or you also need to set up under ExFlow email setup a setting for it to work. You also set up how many days after the start date of the period you should receive the reminder. You do it here. If you leave it blank, then it will send you a reminder when the period ends. And then if you want to, you can also set up a contract reminder. So you fill out the information here, and then this person or group will receive a reminder when the contract is about to expire, for example, if you want that. And you can set how long before you want the contract reminder to be sent out. And then the last setting is auto approve matched invoices. And And this one, if you tick this one, and if everything is correct according to the contract you have set up, then the invoice will go directly to approval status and have the status to be ready to be posted. So then your approvers do not need to approve these reoccurring invoices. You can, if you want to stretch it even further, add a setting in ExFlow Setup that also make the documents to be posted automatically as well. So those were the settings. Let's have a look at some invoices. Let's start with one that is if everything is correct, how it looks like in the approval status. I have not activated the setting that it should be posted automatically now. So that means that if a document, if everything is correct, it moves through the flow, and then it will have the status ready for posting. You can add the column so you can see the contract number. And you can see here for this document, all the lines are approved. If we look on the details of the lines, you can see here approver groups, but then you can see it says approved by admin. And that is because I set up the contract. So it says me, but then you can see on the comment that it's automatically matched by the system. So then you will understand why that happened. And then down here, if you have attached any supporting documents that you want to follow, you can see it in this box here as well. So this is if a document then moves through the flow, if everything was correct according to what you set up. Let's go to the import journal and look at if a document then deviates from what you have set up. So you can see here that I have a warning message that is not yet accepted. You can see that this invoice have a reference code that it has interpreted, and it connected to this contract. We also have an approval rule and a purchase code here, which then created the lines. And then we have approval rules here. We also have a deferral here, for example. But then if we go to the fact box, because we had a warning message, it says here under warning messages that the invoice amount is over period invoice amount for contract number 2, meaning that the invoice I have received now, the amount is higher than what we have set as a maximum amount. So what you need to do then to create this document is to accept all warnings, and then you can go ahead and create the document. This message will then follow the document in the discussion panel, so it will be added there automatically and follow the document. So you don't have to write something manual here. It will follow so your approvers know why they suddenly received a document for this contract and vendor, for example. So to summarize the difference between these two, the one here and the one in approval status, the one in approval status had ready to be posted as a status because it was created automatically and approved by the system because all criteria match to the document. And in this one, it did not match because the amount was higher than the set amount. So then it stays in the import journal, so you have to review it before you can create the document and then send it out for approval.